Trust your instinct. One life ends, another begins. One life ends. The right one. Action.
When I was a kid, I stayed up late and watched horror lists that counted down either horror games, movies, creepypastas, you name it. And while most of them have aged poorly due to the interests of creators focusing on jump scares in the gaming sphere, childish writing of creepypastas, and the culture constantly shifting, one game that always stood out to me was Layers of Fear. To many, it was a horror game that had no substance. No survival mechanics, no ways of defending yourself, just you walking from room to room while experiencing this mansion of madness the character resides in. And don't get me wrong, there are many flaws to this game, such as the ridiculous stipulations to get the multiple endings, the repetitive nature of some of the rooms, and the DLC just being very strange and a kind of slap in the face of an ending. There are many flaws with this game, and I will not defend this game on this pedestal today. But from the surreal visuals, some amazingly executed psychological effects, and a story that feels like something from a modern movie, this game has always been a guilty pleasure for me. Something about taking the personality of an artist and using his own flaws such as greed, lust, and sadness against him to illustrate a personal hell is a great story concept, and after I finished the game, I wanted another one. But I didn't know how the developer Blooper team would execute it back then, since they were a newer studio. And with one of the endings lingering in the back of my head, memories of the game faded as I moved on to other bigger and better things that were coming out. But in late 2018, a video popped up on their YouTube channel simply titled Project Melies, and everyone was stumped on what this could be. People soon caught on that Melies was referred to George Melies, an early 20th century director that revolutionized early silent film with films such as House of the Devil, The Astronomer's Dream, and most famously, A Trip to the Moon. Regarded as the first film director from his construction of fictional stories, set design, slow motion, double exposure, and many more techniques that helped pave the direction for modern film. Immediately, I was extremely interested in the studio's primary horror direction to take a dive at the history of early film in a horror game. Many have never really done it, and while we have plenty of examples now, this was unique for a game that was coming out in 2019. Soon, Project Melies was revealed to be Layers of Fear 2, with a completely new story to tackle and twisted environments to explore. However, I want to do something different this time around. Instead of deconstructing every aspect of the game and giving a conclusion, I am going to take specific sequences from the game and deconstruct them using film techniques used over the last 100 years in celebration for the central theme of the game around early film. I will be playing the first half of the game, breaking down certain sequences by showing you film techniques and film setups, and explaining the elements contribute to the effectiveness of the scene or the scare or whatever it's going to be. I will also be going over some of these scenes, so I would recommend you do play the game before you watch my video, as right now it's $20 on Steam, or you could wait until the Steam Summer Sale at the time of this release date. If you want my review on this game, it's overshadowed by its more hollow first game, and if you love film, I suggest you take a look at this one. With those disclaimers out of the way, let's delve into the examination of a story and the effective nature of the tortured artist. This is Layers of Fear 2. Before we dive into the story, I wanted to touch on the setting and the stylistic choices that the creators use. For most traditional films, many start with establishing shots to give an overview of the setting. This establishes many aspects such as rules of the film's world, important places of interest, and characters to smoothly transition into the plot. For Layers of Fear 2, there is never an establishing shot, and we never go anywhere outside of the ship. From the confined cabin halls for the passengers, the various props that cluttered rooms, and full sets built around the ship, the player always feels confined or trapped in this vessel. With a few times the player is shown a larger environment, if they are up on the upper deck of the ship, there is no land nearby and only the dark waters of the ocean. For the player, there is always a fight constricted and unrestricted when it comes to the whole game to cause tension. Additionally, there are unconventional uses of the Dutch or oblique angle where the ship tilts and uses diegetic sound to have metal creaking to make the ears cringe and create anxiety. But with all of these suspenseful elements, why is this game specifically suited for the horror genre? If we break down horror to the original term of Gothic, Roger Luckhurst states, Gothic plots often revolve around ideas of transgression, the breaching of boundaries of life and death, good taste and bad, knowledge and belief, and this restless transformation makes it a privileged place for many to explore foundation questions of self and other. To summarize this quote, the horror genre evolves just as society evolves through multiple periods of history. Take a film like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, for instance. While the film is dated from some of its archaic treatment of women in these films at the time, many consider this film to be a pillar of the horror genre from the tense scenes that make the viewer feel uncomfortable. Anthony Perkins' role as Norman Bates with the constant shift between naturalistic and non-naturalistic acting.
The reason I asked, you said you'd seen so many in the past couple of days, I thought maybe you, what was it you wanted to ask?
What's registering anymore, you know, one by one you drop the formalities. I shouldn't even bother changing the sheets, but old habits die hard.
And the famous shower sequence that has now been embedded into pulp culture ever since. And to demonstrate this, I want to comment on the mise-en-scène used in the opening of the game. The game starts with a character standing up abruptly in the halls of a sinking ship. Water slowly rising and furniture destroyed and the lights broken. With a simple tutorial of an opening a door, the player is presented with an unskippable cutscene.
You almost had it.
While first impressions of this intro are confusing to most players, it is not uncommon for films and games to cut to the end of a story, such as in Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction, and Saving Private Ryan. This is appropriately called reverse chronology and is defined in which the plot is revealed in a reverse order to the general story in order to build mystery. To the player, the sudden introduction of this mysterious woman and child implies there is something deeper beneath the surface. Next, there is a lot to deconstruct from this quick scene. There are both characters' attire, which could represent people from the main character's past, the setting being a stage, and the boy emitting a bright light. Many of these contribute to the mystery. At this point, there is a meaning behind the line, "You almost had it." But without spoiling the story's ending, the statement leaves many players up for questioning what it really means. In typical horror fashion, these elements I have described are drenched in symbolism to relate to the main character, and while there are better examples coming up in the video, the mise-en-scène uses elements like the past coming to terms with identity and forgiveness in this one scene to create a mystery that the character and player must confront. After the prologue, the player learns the plot of the story. They control an unnamed actor who takes the acting role for a famous yet equally mysterious director. Soon, he makes the actor remember their past and trauma to continue the filming of his new movie, and throughout the game, the player has the decision to obey or disobey the director. As they go act by act, the surreal and horrifying visuals grow even more insane, hinting at the deterioration of the actor's mind. And while in retrospect, there are other horror games with more memorable intros such as Silent Hill 2, Resident Evil 7, and Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Layers of Fear 2 proves that it could stand on its own two legs while enticing the player into the world of madness. While I have gone over one sequence that introduces the player to the world of the game, I wanted to share a few still shots that incorporate foreshadowing or symbolism. It is important to note that while these are originally sequences, I will be analyzing the details taken from these stills that I have produced. I want to first prioritize that while this is a first-person game, all the stills used will be defined in a first-person perspective, but for this specific still, I wanted to define it as a medium full shot. Next, I want to draw context to the lights coming from each door. While we have diegetic lighting like the wall light, the lights coming from behind the doors use hard lighting, as we can see that there are start and stopping points of the light coming through the doors, giving a harsher tone to the room. Lastly, the colors in the still are dominated by both shades of red and white. While the red is a more darker color, the white trim along the walls contrasts the darker colors. Take into account the seemingly infinite depth of the hallway beyond that plays into the standard horror trope of dark hallways that lead to danger. However, this trope is twisted by having the doors open, as the player could first interpret any of the doors as a safe spot. However, the red light makes the player think twice about entering the doors, and therefore is forced to go down the hallway. While there may be no narrative connection that can be clearly made, it demonstrates how, while these tropes may not work individually, the atmosphere created by the still proves to create suspense and tension. Coming to a hole in one of the walls, the player makes their way through a crawl space and looks through an opening down onto the set of a film. Once again, we have a first-person shot, but now it is positioned at a high angle looking down onto a set, and while it may be hard to see because it is not completely in the still, there is a frame around the shot that creates the feeling of looking at something in a confined space. The noir filter gives off both a high contrast and the black and white contrast between the light and darkness, giving the still a lot more moody look. And lastly, the scaffolding above gives a concentrated light to show some of the set, such as a wheel, the cannon, the mast, the trapdoor, and the mannequin sitting near the mast. Overall, while this scene does not build tension, the feeling of being confined and looking at a moment frozen on time the ship is enough to keep the player trying to figure out the mystery of this game. This last still is what I believe to be one of the most visually impressive shots from the game. Here, after roaming around through the various engine rooms of the ship, the player finds themselves in what appears to be the main engine room. There is a low-angle shot to show the size of the heart of the machine. Once again, the noir filter incorporates low-key lighting to contrast the light emanating from the mouth of the face. Next, the mannequins working and the steam given off up above gives off the industrial look to show oppressive atmosphere. Before entering the mouth of the machine, the director comments that one suffers for another takes their place, the machine goes on. And in this one line, the delivery of the narrator explains the cycle of human life and how mannequins at the back are just workers that will soon be replaced by another. The blinding white light in the mouth could represent the character passing on to be truly free from this world. But overall, the set piece steals the visual show, in which the player is nothing compared to the overall demonic look of the machine's face and mouth. While the stills that I have shown you have been surreal, nothing compares to the curveball that is known as Act 4. Well, it first starts off somewhat normally in a cluttered kitchen. When the player is walking up a flight of stairs, this event occurs. While the player has been slowly introduced into the madness through the intro and the mise-en-scène throughout the game, having the environment become this abstract so abruptly shows that this might delve into the deepest parts of the character's mind, and immediately after, the player opens a door to find something different to what they have been exploring.
Some parts are not to be played. Some parts.
While previously there had been a variety of colors and filters used throughout the game, the ship consistently had a high contrast palette of colors such as white and brown. Now, the furniture, walls, and other decor is colored a dark blood red. There are even fruits that cover some of the chairs and tables that leak this same red substance as it makes the atmosphere feel oppressive and unwelcoming. But soon, there are more gruesome scenes as you walk from room to room.
I'm not upset. Nothing really happened.
There is always a lingering threat that the player has walked into something that they aren't supposed to see. With the mannequins either twitching or in odd positions, the red rooms remind the player that there is something wrong. And while there are some good scares that appear now and again, nothing compares to the sequence early on in the chapter.
Things happen. Bad things. I am still here. This is not the end. This pain will pass. The scars will fade. Flame will burn it all away.
When the player attempts to go to the end of the hallway, the mannequins slowly animate to be terrified of the character's presence. Soon, when about to approach the dark figure, the last mannequin stops the player, and the screen flashes to show many hands trying to reach towards them, while the voice of the figure talks about how it isn't the character's fault. Soon the player realizes that they cannot turn around. They back away slowly, and as they do this, the arms start to close off the progress that they made. As soon as the sequence ends, the player turns around to see a spotlight suddenly go out. This sequence is genius. Having the player to mimic a push-in and pull-out shot is a brilliant reference to the director's film being produced on a ship. The point of this shot is to focus on something in the character's view, and since the player has nowhere else to go, forcing them to get close only to back out is a great decision to build tension and to get an effective scare. It also shows that while the character is an actor in the game, the player leads them through all of these hallways, corridors, and other settings. If that is the case, then the player is almost like the director's cameraman, showing the journey from start to finish. And while I do wish they did more creative scares like this sequence was so well executed and one of the highlights of the game. While we took a look at many of these stills and sequences that were out of order, I hope that I have convinced you to take a look at this game. While many criticized the game's narrative after Act 4 for leaning too heavily into the surreal and abstract, I still highly enjoyed replaying this game for its visuals alone. The artist and narrative team did a significant amount of research into set design, the high variety of sequences that were horrifying and intriguing to go through, and the history of film from the silent era up to the golden age of Hollywood. And while the game encourages players to find collectibles such as movie posters that reference other works, strange objects floating in the sea, and mysterious objects that contribute to the more powerful entity that is present in both games, the story on its own is fantastic and easily recommendable. If I've convinced you to play the game, please let me know how you felt about the experience, and feel free to leave a comment down below. While this game is not talked about as often online anymore, I would like to see it spark up again. While I think it is a flawed game in an extent, it's impossible to deny the beauty of this slow-burning masterpiece. Until next time, play your part, and thanks for watching.